Hearing loss is a huge, growing and unseen issue for society. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 5 people worldwide are currently living with hearing loss. This impacts their access to communication, employment, education, healthcare and public services. My name is Qais and I was born profoundly deaf. I wear bilateral cochlear implants which now allow me to hear and speak. It's this personal journey that led me to create Connect with Qais. The aim of this show is to provide a safe space where individuals can come together to discuss the challenges and opportunities they face in today's changing society. Today's exciting hearing and communication technologies mean we have more opportunities than ever before. Does society know this? Through Connect with Qais, I hope to raise awareness in society and in the media where those of us with hearing loss are often misrepresented. I'll be talking to people who are deaf and hard of hearing and those professionals working with them. Careers, relationships, technology, mental health, nothing's off the table as we hear the stories and insights that can inspire a more inclusive and informed society. Today's guest offers a fascinating insight into hearing loss and how it's linked to mental health. Stuart McNaughton is a psychotherapist, clinical supervisor and founder of the Cochlear Implant Coach, a service dedicated to supporting adults and families across a wide range of deaf issues. As a cochlear implant user himself, Stuart is able to draw on the psychological principles and his own lived experience. Stuart is also the author of a book, He Is Not Me, which is an account of a childhood with deafness and his experience in the run-up to and after cochlear implantation. In this episode, we'll talk about mental health and hearing loss and the benefits of therapy for anyone who is struggling. Okay, let's get into it. Hey Stuart, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Qais. I'm blushing, with that wonderful intro. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's such a pleasure to reconnect, especially after running into each other a couple of times at the Cochlear Implantation conferences in Rotterdam earlier this year. It's always nice to see a familiar face.
Absolutely. We keep bumping into each other for some reason.
Yes, it's, I've seen some of the great services you provide throughout the social media, and it's so nice to find someone who's willing to offer a range of therapeutic tools to help others make sense of their challenges. I absolutely love how you created the alphabet series that call A to Z Why Hearing Matters. It's a mix of evidence-based and content and life experiences, topics such as awareness, blinding, cognition, dementia, employment, and more. So it's really cool how you crafted a content in such a creative way.
That's great. That's nice to hear. The feedback, the comments from that have been really, really positive. And I think I just wanted to kind of make it real, not just about hearing, but also the other stuff.
As we know today, we are going to discuss mental health. It's such a crucial topic and it is quite uncommon to discuss mental health in our community. Many people don't actually realize how much we are going through. So before diving into discussing mental health and the services you provide, I would love to learn more about your journey with hearing loss. So I know you quite well, but for our listeners today, maybe you could start by telling us what it was like growing up with hearing loss.
Okay, yeah, it sounds like a good place to start, I guess. So what happened was I remember my parents telling me this story many times, but I stopped responding when I was about 1.5 years old. I stopped responding to sound. I didn't get my first hearing aids until I was about 5, so it took quite a long time to get diagnosed. My mum was shown a number of deaf schools at that time, but was against them. So I ended up being mainstream schooled. And other childhood things, I think I was okay until I was about 7. And that was before the bullying started. And it started with things like name calling, but it was at secondary school that things got progressively worse. And there was one incident where one of my hearing aids was flushed down the toilet. by a bully at school. The day I left school was actually one of the best days of my life up till that point, because I had such a bad experience. And
Yeah.
when I look back, sometimes I wonder how I survived, because I felt quite lonely growing up. And writing about these earlier experiences in my book were quite healing.
I think going to the school, it's one of the most challenging experiences. It filled with mixed emotions and the struggle to adapt in an environment where people who can hear, we all tend to experience a lack of confidence due to our disability, like lack of friendships, low self-esteem, and challenges with our sense of identity. I remember I didn't have any friends throughout the school and college, and I felt so lonely. I used to walk around during the break time and lunchtime, and there was no one I could talk to. It was really hard. So you mentioned that. Did you mention that you had your second implant 13 years after your first implant? What was that experience like?
Um, yeah, that's there's lots of nice memories around that time. I got my first implant when I was about 23, but I didn't get my second implant until 13 years later, and I think that was in 2014.
Right.
Hearing in both ears is amazing. I mean, the psychological burden of relying on just one ear is so enormous. These days, I'm much less stressed, because if I know that if one of my processors stops working, starts malfunctioning, I can still hear in the other ear, which enables me to go to work, to function, basically, until I get the other processor fixed. We know that in the UK, very few people get two processors, and I do wonder sometimes how much this is contributing to the listening fatigue, stress, and that psychological burden that I mentioned earlier. With two ears, I can even hear where things are coming from. So I don't just feel confident, I feel a lot safer. I still remember actually the day that my second device was activated. I rushed home, I put on a pair of headphones and listened to a piano concerto by Shostakovich, an amazing composer. Now imagine this, close your eyes and being able to hear where the individual instruments were in stereo sound. It was just so amazing. I actually cried. It was just so amazing. Something that I would like to add to that, though, is that I was told to manage my expectations when it came to my second implant. But what's interesting is my second implant is now better than my first.
Right.
So, I mean, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about resilience, we're talking about achieving our best life, whatever. And I think I would rather have high expectations and endure the disappointment than have no expectations and to not try, which I've seen so many people do. And sometimes I think as a result of that, they don't do as well with their cochlear implants.
Right.
So anyway.
Does it benefit for you to have a second cochlear implant, as in way it felt as a huge difference to your life?
Absolutely, because the thing is, part of me lived in fear before, because let's say you have to, in my case, I would often have to take very long trips to my place of work, sometimes even a flight. What if on the way my one ear stopped working? You know, we shouldn't have to survive with just one ear. It's not when we know that we can benefit from two. So I know that this is a common topic, and I'm not sure if we have time to talk about that as well today, but the psychological burden has been lifted enormously.
Right. And I'm sure that we can talk about this topic in another episode.
Oh,
Of
I'm
course.
willing if you are.
Yes. So what led you to start the Cochlear Implant Coach?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you've asked, because over the years in my earlier work, I travelled across the world, and I met hundreds of people with cochlear implants. I met with families, and I saw firsthand the loss, the grief, the stigma, the shame around their family's experience with hearing loss. And often I would just meet the parents, and it was only later that I realised in some countries, children were hidden away because they were deaf. A few years ago, I also had my own mental health problems. And this, for me, it started when I got my second implantation, because I suddenly felt like I was being watched all the time. And I was having a bit of an identity crisis, because before I was deaf on one side with this device, and I was hearing on this side, but with no device. It was like an identity thing. I had two different masks. I sought help. I had an amazing therapist. And for me, therapy had been so transformative that it inspired me to retrain. So in 2019, I qualified as a psychotherapist. And I guess to answer your question, I created the Cochlear Implant Coach because of what I'd seen. All the shaming, all the stigmatizing, my own life experience, and simply wanting to help people with this. Our own health services don't seem to have the time to do these kind of deep dives on issues like this, and it's really sad to see.
Could I ask what you used to be before you started the Cochlear Implant Coach?
Again, very good questions. I feel like I'm doing the thing that I love now, but my first career was in accounting.
Oh.
My second career was in marketing.
Oh, wow.
And then I went into teaching, and I retrained for every career. I love learning. And I taught for 10 years at a university in London. And I think that also plays into my desire to help people, to help nurture them, to mold them, because we're all a work in progress.
It's incredible how this journey led you to create a Cochlear Implant Coach, as you were qualified as an accountant, and then you transformed into a marketing role, and finally you discovered a teaching. All of these areas that combine to create the Cochlear Implant Coach. It's awesome how you created the service to support our community with a range of the services, programs, and training. We need more people like you and the services you have created. Do you feel that there are lack of psychological support out there?
Definitely. I mean, we're already seeing in the National Health Service that if you want to get access to counselling or therapy, there is a 2-year waiting list.
Right.
Imagine having to wait for 2 years to talk to a professional when it could just be simply 2 or 3 sessions to maybe think about some unhealthy thinking styles. Or you shouldn't be waiting 2 years for what I think are quite basic services.
Deaf people are not the same as hearing people. In a way, our understanding, our perspective and experiences are way different. And I found out that some studies suggest that deaf individuals experience mental health concerns at a much higher rate than hearing people do. When I mention about mental health, I'm referring to all complex areas such as communication difficulties, social challenges, lack of awareness, and barriers to education, employment, and accessible information. It's that intersections of all these layers and layers of factors that ends up affecting our mental health. So it's a big issue.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I've been discriminated against a number of times in employment situations. And this is simply because, firms have got their own targets to meet. They need to operate quickly. And sometimes that does come at the detriment of certain employees, and especially employees who are different, because we can't always keep up at the same speed.
I see. So what does a day at work look like for you?
Okay. I've got a smile on my face because I do enjoy what I do. Every day I'm listening to people's stories, and they've got some real genuine concerns. Some of my recent work has been supporting a young adult who has been othered his whole life. And what I mean by that, he's felt different. He's felt less than other people. So we've been working on what it means to be different. And in fact, the only thing we all have in common is that we are different.
Mm.
So we've been working on what's called a locus of evaluation. So that means strengthening their own core values so that if other people have opinions or points of view, that they aren't so hurtful to that person. I've also supported other people who've felt a deep sense of shame. And we've been working together using a combination of what's called person-centered therapy, which is really about sitting with how they feel and why they feel the way they feel, and combining this with cognitive behavioral therapy so that we can develop healthier ways of thinking about things. And I think it's really important to emphasize how important this work actually is, how needed it is. The World Report on Hearing by the World Health Organization that was released a couple of years ago clearly summarized some of what you mentioned earlier, that people with hearing loss, it impacts communication, employment, mental health, relationships. And where do people go for support on this? Healthcare systems are not providing this, at least not quickly enough. In my work, I also provide, you asked me about what a typical day is like. So in my work, I also provide a space for parents to feel heard. My mum has told me this story many times over the years, but back in 1981, 1982, she was told by a professional that I was either incredibly deaf or incredibly stupid. Now, that was quite a few years ago, and I'd like to think that we've come a long way since then. But more recently, a client told me that an audiologist said to them that they would be devastated if their own child was deaf.
Mm.
So, the insensitive language is also impacting on the mental health of parents who are already worried about their children's futures. So to answer your question, my daily work really involves supporting people now, not in 2 years' time when the National Health Service can provide it. And it's also worth pointing out, something's just come to my mind, that there was a recent study where there were over 1,000 respondents. And I think 32% of people felt that there was not enough rehabilitation services, while 27% said there was none. That sounds really stressful. So again, where do these people go to process that disappointment before it snowballs into feeling like they're failing, or even worse, feeling like they're not good enough? And you said something earlier about maybe we do need more people doing what I do. And I do believe that in the future, there will be more cochlear implant coaches because this need is real.
So, what would you say to someone who has been thinking about reaching out to a therapist?
Basically, don't delay, because for me, it was transformative. And since I qualified as a therapist myself, I'd like to think that I brought some comfort to people that I've supported. If someone is delaying, I would probably ask them to think about why. So what is holding them back from getting this kind of support? Many people feel like they don't deserve. And therapy is about challenging that kind of thing as well. Why don't we deserve? Would it be seen as weak? Is it a value that you've maybe inherited from your family or your culture? I wish we could all live in a world where everybody felt comfortable enough to ask for the support that could help them lead better lives.
To be honest, when I was younger, I didn't know if there was someone who provided a psychological support for people who are deaf, and I wasn't aware this type of support existed.
Mhm.
And if I had known earlier when I was in college or university, I would have reached out.
And yeah, and I think what you're talking about there is awareness. I mean, we are evolving, society is evolving, but we want it to be a bit faster so that more people get that support.
And speaking of the services that you provided, why do you believe it's important to provide support services specifically tailored to parents who have a deaf child for the first time?
That's a good question. I mean, when I get to speak about this kind of thing, and I've said this millions of times, parenting is the hardest job in the world.
Hmm.
And I don't think you need to be a parent to feel compassion for when a parent is told that their child can't hear. It's heartbreaking. But life hasn't ended. It's just changed course. And sometimes just sitting with a parent and, actually just listening to them, they need that kind of support now, not in 6 months' time, not in 2 years' time. One client recently told me that they had a session with a therapist as part of their child's cochlear implant process. And when they wanted another session, they were told that the next available appointment was in 4 months' time. Now, is this really the best we can do? If there are any parents listening to this, please reach out. Don't struggle on your own. You don't need to. We can work together to build you up, to provide you with tools so that you can raise your child, so that they can thrive and hopefully not have the childhood I had at school.
As you mentioned, that it was really heartbreaking for parents who have a deaf child for the first time. As I remember, long story short, I was the first person to be born profoundly deaf in the family, and it was really difficult for my parents. My parents and I are incredibly lucky to have had two main people in my life who was working with cochlear implant services at that time, and who was a teacher of the deaf. They helped my parents a lot in getting cochlear implants and
Mhm.
services they provided. But however, that's not the same reality for some parents who did not receive any support. Therefore, it's absolutely crucial to provide
Mhm.
support services to parents who have a deaf child for the first time, so there won't be any delay in child's development.
Absolutely. And you raise a very good point there because it really is very much a postcode lottery. And I'm glad that you got the support that you got. When I was doing my research for the Cochlear Implant Coach, I called 4 cochlear implant centres and asked them what psychological provision there is on their program. And all 4 programs said because of the cuts, because of lack of budgets, there was no psychological provision. So I'm left wondering, why are we left to process this transition from the deaf world to the hearing world without that kind of support?
Hmm.
It's mind-boggling, really.
So do we need more specific services in our community?
Well, there's already a lot of support out there, but there's also a lot of misinformation. And this is why we do need to tailor services to the needs of each individual or each family, because all individuals and all families are unique. We just need to be a little bit more person-centered, family-centered, and we need it now.
Yeah. I
Like I
think
said, not in months to come, not in years to come, but we need it now. So,
I think there needs to be a much of the awareness of the services out there, because I don't think that so many deaf people are actually realize there are psychological support for people who are deaf or wears cochlear implants or even with hearing loss out there, and they just need to be a raise awareness.
absolutely, absolutely. And things like your podcast is your way of contributing to that. So it's great that you're doing this.
Thank you very much, Stuart. I very much appreciate it. So, just to a final question to wrap up this conversation, do you have any tips or advice on managing on our mental health?
Well, I've got lots of tips, lots of resources, but mental health is very much an individual thing. Um, Before I think what might be a good idea is to share how I handle my mental health, and maybe somebody can take a tip or two from that. But to feel grounded, we need to put ourselves at the center of our own lived experience. So what I mean, in sessions, I like to use the oxygen mask principle. You know, when you're on a plane and there's an emergency and the plane's going down, we have to put our own oxygen mask on before helping others, yeah? Now, the same is true when we're feeling stressed or feel that we might be having mental health problems. We need to put our oxygen mask on, because if we don't, we won't be there for others. We can't be there for our children. So my training is really the best thing that I've ever done. So all I can really share is how I've worked on my own mental health over the years. So on a social level, surround yourself with good people. Family matters. My parents are amazing and I'm still lucky to have them around. 3 good friends who actually listen, support and champion you is better than 20 flaky friends or thousands of followers.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've got a very small circle of friends. I've known them for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. They know me inside and out. They know what my triggers are. They know what I like, what I don't like. And I feel incredibly supported by them.
I think you made it a good point out there, as in a way that some of us, we have a great circle of friends and family who willing to accept ourselves, wouldn't change for who we are. Unfortunately, there are people out there who are struggling, as in a way they don't have any friends, they don't have any families to support them, and it's a struggle for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of loneliness out there. And
Yeah.
sometimes in my counselling sessions, this becomes a topic. And it's all about exploring what your values are, what you would like to get out of this life, and slowly make those steps, really slow steps, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So, yeah, I think socially, I think it's important to be grounded, to surround yourself with good people. I also think practicing gratitude is important. Every night before I go to bed, I'm in the dark, under the covers, and I think about 3 good things that happened today. And I have so much to be grateful for. But these things didn't just happen. I worked on myself and
Right.
it helped to make these things happen. I mean,
Yeah.
we talk about gratitude. I mean, just a few years ago, we were at the peak of a pandemic. We are so lucky to be alive. And we quickly forget those things. We're lucky. We are very lucky. And I think practicing this is also useful.
I've seen that some of the social media that you share that, in speaking of mental health, you talk 2 hours of a break for fresh air and have your time for yourself. That's very inspiring, as not many people out there can actually realize they need to look after for themselves.
Absolutely. And I think what you've pointed out there is that solitude is also very important. And I mean, what many people fail to understand is that the longest relationship you will ever have during this lifetime is the relationship you have with yourself. So you can make it a really good one by appreciating the smaller things in life and being kind to yourself. So in my work, I see people with a lot of what we call negative automatic thoughts, NATs. And we work together to explore how or if those negative automatic thoughts are serving them. Quite often they're not. So sometimes they are learned behaviours from close family. But in our solitude, we're able to be more objective about what behaviours are ours and what behaviours we've learned from other people. So I think solitude is also very important for our mental health.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say to answer your question is use our brains. You can do this by studying, by reading, by engaging with a sport. Just stay active, because when we're active, the body rewards us with a lot of happy hormones. Now, I spend 2 hours outdoors every day,
Yeah.
and that greatly improves my mood. So most importantly, I think, is to accept that we are going to mess up and that we are going to feel bad sometimes. And it's okay not to be okay. It's part of the human experience. And of course, if none of that works, give me a call or reach out to a therapist.
Stuart, I think we need more people like you. That was so inspiring. And as in a way that you gave me some tips and advice for myself. And that was really useful. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences and services you provided. I hope that this is something that we can work together to improve more services in our community. And we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. We've come a long way,
Yeah.
but there's always room for improvement. And thank you for inviting me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to share what I do, because, it's all awareness raising. So thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you again in the future conferences.
I'd love to. I'll see you soon.